For 6 years, Massimo and I have shared a perfect life, made of love, respect, and an unstoppable passion for adventure. We are curious souls, united by the desire to discover the world and savor every experience without reservation. Whether it's a walk in the woods or an impromptu trip to an unknown city, our existence has always been a mix of emotions and surprises. But over time, that ardor that had driven us to explore seemed to have faded. It hadn't vanished completely, but it hovered in the air like an ember, just waiting for a breath of wind to ignite again. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, while for us it is fundamental. When Massimo proposed a special evening for Halloween, the idea immediately intrigued me, but there was something different in his gaze, an unusual light that put me in a state of subtle uneasiness. It wasn't the usual masquerade party or a simple thematic dinner. No, this time there was a particular electricity in his words, something that bordered on the border between the forbidden and the desired. As we dined by candlelight, he dropped the suggestion with an almost hypnotic calm, causing a palpable tension to vibrate in the air. In the following days, the thought of that proposal gave me no respite. Every attempt to extract details from him clashed with his enigmatic smile, with that look that seemed to know much more than he was willing to reveal. It was a game, a subtle mental push and pull that amused him, and which against all odds began to light a flame in me that I couldn't put out. I imagined everything: an exclusive party, an unconventional experience, a role-playing game between the two of us. But the reality behind that smile was far bolder than I could have predicted. One evening, between a sip of wine and the enveloping warmth of the sofa, Massimo let the veil fall on the mystery. Halloween was the night when anything could happen, when rules could be broken without consequences, and with that disarming tranquility that characterized him, he made me understand that perhaps the time had come to explore new horizons, together with someone else. The proposal hit me like lightning. A similar thought had never crossed my mind, and even less would I have imagined that the very man with whom I had built a life would suggest it to me so naturally. My mind was crowded with questions and conflicting emotions, surprise, embarrassment, and hidden in a dark corner of my conscience, a spark of curiosity. I couldn't fully understand what I felt. It was a crazy, unthinkable idea, yet something inside me refused to reject it completely. Time has passed, but that insinuation continued to snake between us, invisible but present. Every look, every touch, every expectant silence seemed to bring that unspeakable desire to the surface. Our routine has remained unchanged. The laughter during breakfast, the distracted kisses before work, the usual complicity. But the night was different. In quiet moments, when the house was immersed in darkness and only the dim lights of the candles flickered on the furniture, the tension between us grew. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were two souls balanced on a thin thread, suspended between the desire to maintain balance and the temptation to let ourselves fall into the void. One evening, watching an old horror film, awareness made its way inside me. The film was just a pretext, a silent filler that couldn't cover the weight of Massimo's gaze. He observed me intensely, searching my eyes for an answer that I still didn't have the courage to give. No words were needed. We both knew that that thought was now there, insinuated like a sweet and dangerous poison, and for the first time I asked myself if I was really ready to cross that threshold, if I wanted to explore that part of me that I had repressed until then. Perhaps that Halloween would have changed our relationship forever. I felt invaded by a strange vulnerability, as if in that instant Massimo could read every hidden thought, every emotion I was trying to hold back. His gaze seemed to delve into me, as if he was waiting for an answer that I wasn't ready to give yet. And when his voice was barely audible, like a whisper. I felt my heart speed up as I desperately tried to maintain control. I admitted to myself that I had thought about it, that idea hadn't left me for a single moment, but it wasn't an easy decision. Massimo smiled in that way that was so familiar to me, a smile that hid understanding, patience. He didn't need to insist. He knew that the seed of curiosity was now planted inside me and that it would grow on its own without the need for further prompting. This was what made him so irresistible, the ability to leave me space, to allow me to reflect without forcing. Yet precisely that attentive and respectful attitude of his made everything even more intriguing, more impossible to ignore. The more time passed, the more my mind filled with images, scenarios that took shape with disturbing clarity. How was it possible that such a forbidden idea could arouse such an intense thrill of excitement in me? It was the border between desire and fear, between security and the unknown, and I was there, suspended in that precarious balance. Halloween week arrived faster than I expected, and Massimo organized a party at our house, a small, intimate event with friends. Among them, there was also Aurelio, an old university friend of ours, a presence who brought with him memories of laughter, travel, and never-forgotten confidences. Seeing him again, in that context, made everything even more intense. He hadn't changed, yet there was something different about the way I perceived him. Maybe it was me looking at him with new eyes. Maybe it was the mental game that Massimo had triggered that made every gesture, every look, more full of meaning. Aurelio arrived dressed as a vampire, with his usual casual smile and that carefree air that had always distinguished him. At another time, I would have simply laughed with him, enjoying the company of a longtime friend. But that evening, everything had a different nuance. His every joke, his every look, seemed to resonate with me with a new depth. And Massimo knew it. I felt it in his eyes that followed me from afar, in his looks full of complicity. No words were needed. It was a silent game, a thread stretched between us that vibrated with my every movement. As the party progressed with laughter and music, the tension inside me grew. It became almost palpable. I felt observed, studied, not only by Massimo but also by myself. Every fleeting glance I exchanged with Aurelio, every moment of accidental contact seemed amplified. And then there was that moment when I approached to pour myself a glass of wine. Aurelio looked me in the eyes and, for a fraction of a second, I perceived something different, a subtle intensity, a glow that made me hold my breath. It was a brief moment, but enough to make me wonder if he too had picked up on that strange energy hovering in the room. But I wasn't ready, not yet. Every fiber of my body was tense between desire and prudence, between the call of the unknown and the certainty of my relationship with Massimo. I knew that if I crossed that threshold, nothing would ever be the same. What would happen to us? What would have changed in our balance, so perfect and yet so fragile? And so I remained there, halfway between two worlds, unable to choose. At the end of the evening, when the guests began to leave the house, the tension reached its peak. Saying goodbye to Aurelio, I felt Massimo's hand shake mine firmly, as if to remind me that he was there, that whatever I decided, he would remain by my side. It was a silent promise, a comfort, and yet, instead of calming that inner turmoil, it made everything even more intense. Because I knew that tension wouldn't dissolve easily. It was now a constant presence, a shadow that insinuated itself into our daily gestures, into our silences. Every time Massimo absent-mindedly touched me, every time our eyes met, I felt that invisible rope tighten more and more. I was on a slippery slope, knowing that just one step was enough to fall into an unknown abyss. But staying still was equally impossible. I was no longer just a spectator of a dangerous game. I had become part of it. One day, while we were running errands, Massimo took my hand in a gesture that seemed completely natural, yet in that moment I felt something deeper. It was as if he wanted to reassure me, make me feel his presence, remind me that whatever I decided, he would be there, beside me. Genuine concern shone in his eyes. Despite his relaxed demeanor, I knew that he loved me, that what he had proposed was not the result of dissatisfaction, but of a shared desire, of a curiosity that pushed us toward something new, yet this was exactly what put me in difficulty. I didn't know how I would feel afterwards. It was not a decision I could take lightly. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the tension between us, rather than driving us apart, was bringing us closer. I felt that subtle thrill that took me back to the early days of our relationship, when every look and every touch was full of unspoken promises. It was as if this new challenge was rekindling something profound, a desire that was not limited to the physical act, but had to do with our way of discovering ourselves and feeling alive. The following week, to get away from those thoughts that continued to torment me, I decided to organize a special evening just for the two of us. I needed to understand if our intimacy was still enough, if our bond could be enough without the need to involve someone else. So I prepared a romantic dinner. The soft light of the candles enveloped the dining room in a warm and welcoming atmosphere. Our favorite wine filled the glasses with ruby shades, and for a while, it seemed as if we had gone back in time. We laughed, we joked, we remembered the most beautiful moments in our history. Yet, despite everything, that suspended feeling didn't go away. It was there, hidden between the words, insinuated in our looks, even in the way we approached each other. The idea of a triangle was still present, silent and persistent, like a possibility that we had not completely set aside. We both tried to ignore it, but it kept emerging, creeping between us in a subtle and undeniable way. When we finally moved into the living room, I snuggled into him, seeking his warmth, his security. I felt a knot inside me, something I could no longer hold back. We were so close, yet so far away. There was an invisible barrier between us, a tension that held us on the brink of something new and unknown. Finally, the words came out on their own. Admitting that I couldn't stop thinking about it felt almost liberating. The way Massimo looked at me at that moment made me tremble. There was sweetness in his eyes, but also something deeper, an awareness that mirrored my own. He couldn't get it out of his head either. Have you ever felt that irresistible attraction to something that you couldn't get out of your head? Write to me in the comments. When he touched my face with a delicate gesture, I felt my heart speed up. There was no rush, there was no pressure. I knew that if we ever decided to push ourselves further, it would be at the right time, when we both felt ready. Those words, so simple, managed to calm me down and, at the same time, made me feel even more suspended in that indefinite wait. Talking openly about these feelings was strengthening our intimacy, and the desire I felt for him was intensifying in a way it hadn't in a long time. It was as if, in that game of tension and waiting, I was discovering a side of myself that I didn't fully know. The following evenings passed in a similar way. Laughter, moments of intimacy, and that subtle tension that continued to grow, enveloping us like an invisible thread. Every time we went out with friends, every time Aurelio or others were with us, I couldn't help but feel that underground spark, that idea that continued to remain suspended in the air, waiting for the right moment. Then, one evening, Massimo surprised me with a bouquet of red roses. His gaze left no room for doubt. It didn't matter where this road would take us. It didn't matter what we decided to do. What mattered was that no matter what happened, we would be together. Those words, in their simplicity, dissolved all my doubts. because in the end, beyond everything, there was only him, the two of us, and that tension that was now part of us. Maybe we weren't ready to take that step yet, maybe that tension would remain suspended for a long time to come, but I knew that with Massimo I would face anything. The weeks passed, and that subtle sensation did not dissipate. On the contrary, it seemed to have intertwined with our relationship, becoming part of it. It was no longer just a whispered desire, but something that lived between us, growing and changing. I realized how that proposal had transformed the way I looked at Massimo, our bond. Everything seemed more vibrant, more lit, as if we had discovered a new dimension of our being together. Aurelio had also begun to occupy an unusual space in my thoughts. Every time we met, his gaze focused on me in a different, more attentive, more intense way. I felt a subtle electricity growing inside me, a shiver that ran through my skin every time I met his eyes. I had the impression that he too felt that invisible tension, as if it had become a silent wave that enveloped all three of us. It was an evening in early November that changed everything. After a dinner out, Massimo and I returned home. The evening had been pleasant, yet something new shone in his eyes, an intensity I had never seen before. As soon as we entered, he pulled me towards him and kissed me with a passion that took my breath away. It wasn't a simple gesture of love. There was something deeper, a silent revelation of how much further he was ready to go. That moment had arrived. Words were not needed. We both knew the border was about to be crossed. My heart was pounding. My mind was filled with conflicting thoughts. Fear, excitement, desire. The awareness that, once embarked on that path, there would be no turning back. Yet something irrepressible burned inside me. It was as if a fire fueled by weeks of waiting had now transformed into a flame that I could no longer suffocate. Every second seemed to expand in anticipation, while time moved with an almost cruel slowness. When the doorbell rang, I felt my breathing become shorter. Aurelio was there in the doorway with a calm but determined expression, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. The silence between us was full of implications, of withheld expectations. His eyes searched mine, and the moment our pupils met, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Massimo was next to me, his gaze a constant presence, an anchor in the sea of emotions that passed through me. I felt suspended between two poles, between family security and the irresistible call of the unknown. When Aurelio approached, the world seemed to stop. The warmth of his presence, the closeness of our bodies, everything seemed amplified, every sensation more intense, more real. His lips touched mine delicately, an exploratory, almost reverent touch. My heartbeat accelerated as I felt Massimo's hand slide along my back, as if to remind me that he was there, that whatever happened, it would be a shared choice. The kiss deepened slowly, every movement studied, every breath an unspoken promise. I was immersed in a vortex of conflicting emotions, a slow dance of restrained desire and growing audacity. There was no rush, there was no imposition. It was a subtle game of glances, of touches, of breaths that intertwined in the narrow space between us. I felt the warmth of both envelop me, their hands exploring carefully, as if every gesture was an invitation to discover unexplored territory. The awareness of being at the center of that moment, of being the element that united them, made me feel powerful and vulnerable at the same time. It was a night where desire merged with fear, where the boundaries between right and wrong dissolved into twilight. Every kiss, every caress, every suspended moment seemed to take me further and further, dragging me into a vortex that I never imagined could exist, and in that moment, between the warmth of their bodies and the intoxicating awareness of what was happening, I understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The tension growing inside me was something visceral, a latent fire that I could no longer ignore. Every look, every touch, every suspended moment between Aurelio and Massimo seemed to build something bigger, a wave that crashed against my will, bringing me ever closer to a boundary that I knew would be irreversible. When the moment arrived when Massimo approached with an intensity I had never seen before, I understood that we were crossing that fine line. For a moment, my heart trembled in my chest, torn between desire and fear. But then I felt his breath touch my skin, his reassuring presence reminding me that whatever happened, it would be our choice. Aurelio was there, attentive to my every movement. His hands explored my body with an almost studied slowness, while Massimo remained close by, his firm but delicate touch guiding me in that new and overwhelming experience. Every sensation was amplified, every contact a shiver along the skin, a crescendo that could no longer be stopped. Time seemed to expand, every moment suspended between the present and a desire that was no longer just a thought, but something real, pulsating. When everything happened, it was like a whirlwind of emotions that overwhelmed me. There was no longer any separation between our bodies, between our breaths, between the desires intertwined in that perfect moment. The fear dissolved, leaving room only for the awareness of an intense experience, of a bond that at that moment seemed to transcend every boundary. And when everything calmed down, when our heartbeats resumed a slower pace, we found ourselves lying back, the silence speaking louder than any words. Aurelio looked at me with a knowing smile, and in that moment I understood that there was no need to say anything. Massimo was next to me, his hand touching my face with deep tenderness, and I felt that nothing had changed between us, except the awareness of having experienced something extraordinary. Over the next few days, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived that night, every whisper, every shiver etched in my memory. It had been such an intense experience that it seemed unreal, yet the effects were there, tangible. Massimo looked at me with a new intensity, and Aurelio had become a silent but constant presence, a shared secret that shone between us with the strength of an indelible memory. Yet, along with that euphoria, new questions also began to arise. Now that that wish had been fulfilled, what would happen? Would we be able to get back to normal? I felt an emptiness creeping inside me, a subtle fear that something had changed irreversibly. Massimo sensed my hesitation before I could even express it. One evening, while we were alone, his presence next to me was reassuring. His gaze reflected a deep understanding. At that moment, I understood that nothing could affect what we had built. That night had not distanced us. On the contrary, it had added something new, strengthening a bond that was already solid. Aurelio continued to be a part of our lives, but without that moment repeating itself. It remained there, like a fragment of an unrepeatable experience, a memory engraved in our gazes when we met by chance. Over time, life resumed its course. Massimo and I continued to explore our relationship with a renewed intensity, but always remaining ourselves, bound by that unconditional trust that had always united us. The triangle with Aurelio had been a spark, a moment in which desire had taken over, but now I knew that that light belonged only to the two of us. That night had changed something inside me. It had shown me new facets of my being, but it had also revealed how deep the bond with Massimo was. And so, while the memory of that night faded into the past, our story continued, stronger, more aware, more true. We had crossed a boundary, yet in the end we found ourselves at the center of what really mattered. The love we had built, capable of withstanding every storm, of overcoming every temptation. A love based on trust, a bond that no experience could ever scratch. If you want to receive new videos of the series, write "I want the sequel" in the comments. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive a preview of future publications. Thank you.